In the Aegean, we're going to focus on the three major Aegean cultures. These cultures roughly parallel in time that of the arts of Egypt and Mesopotamia that we've just studied. The three major Aegean cultures were the Cycladic, the Minoan, and the Mycenaean. The Cycladic is centered on a group of small islands in the Aegean Sea. This culture dated from roughly 2800 to 2000 BC, and the major images that we'll look at in the Cycladic region are small figures in marble. The Minoan culture centered on the island of Crete. This was named for King Minos. This culture dated from 2800 to 1100 BC, and the major images that we'll look at in the Minoan section are pottery, palaces, fresco paintings and decorations, and snake goddesses. The Mycenaean culture is also known as the Helladic, and this refers to the culture on the south coast of the Greek mainland that centered on the city of Mycenae. This culture dates from around 1600 to 1100 BC, and the major images that we'll look at here will be the Lion Gate, beehive tombs, daggers, gold masks, and cups. This is a figure from Amorgos in the Cyclades, dates from 2500 BC. It's marble and stands 30 inches tall. Most of the Cycladic figures represent highly schematized representations of the female figure. In fact, the head from a figure such as this was featured prominently in the opening ceremonies to the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens, Greece. Now, what have we seen in earlier cultures to remind us of Cycladic idols such as this? Neolithic representations of the mother goddess. How are they similar? They're similar in that the figure is anonymous, and so it's representative of a larger concept, that of the life-giving forces of women. I can't let this slide go by without commenting on that blue in the background against the earth tone of the figure. This is just a gorgeous slide. Now, sculpture such as this is highly abstract and symbol-oriented, and so it's very much more like modern work, such as the following slide. This is Constantine Brancusi's The Kiss from the early 20th century, 1909 in fact. It's stone and stands about 3 feet tall. Now, abstraction itself is not such a radical idea. What perhaps is radical is the modern aversion to the concept. Lots of people look at abstract art and think, oh, well, they just do it that way because they can't do it any better. And that's not the case, and we go all the way back to the Aegean and see how that leads into the Greeks, who, after their period of abstraction, realized the absolute pinnacle of realism. I love this sculpture, the way they're wrapped around one another so tightly, and they're kissing, and it appears that they both have their eyes wide open. This is a seated harp player from the Cyclades. It's marble from the early in the 3rd millennium BC. Now, not all of the Cycladic figures represent women. However, most of the representations of man depict him as a musician. Now, these representations differ from those of the mother goddess in that the figures of the men are much more three-dimensional. Now, do you have any guesses as to what would account for this difference in treatment? Maybe it's the religious significance of the female idols that called for a different treatment, like that of the pharaohs in Egyptian art. This is a piece called Harpist, so-called the Orpheus figure, marble and from the Cyclades, late 3rd millennium BC, stands 8.5 inches tall. Now this harpist is a splendid fusion of figure and supporting elements, that of the harp and the chair, like we saw in the previous image. Now in both of these, there seems to be a very important concern with regard to the formal qualities of the image. And it's that of a sensitivity for the role played in the piece by the negative spaces, specifically those areas not physically and tangibly part of the sculpture. Again, there is a modern parallel for this lyre player and its spatial considerations. Let's take a look at the next slide. This is Henry Moore's sculpture of a recumbent figure from 1936, done in green Horton stone that's 54 inches long. So these spatial considerations, this concern with negative space, is present in the 20th century, and it's present thousands of years ago. Here's another one of the tremendous female figures from the Cycladic culture. I think the abstraction here is just tremendous, and I think they're very elegant in terms of their simplicity. Simple shapes, only denoting in detail that which is absolutely necessary, and this makes for a splendid, splendid sculpture. Here's one other Cycladic figure, a little different in its proportion. This is not typically what you see. The previous image and the one that we started out with are much more typical of what the Cycladic artists produced. But this one, even with the squat proportions, I think denotes elegance in its abstraction and in its simplicity. We're going to look now at Minoan art. And Minoan art is separated into 3 time periods. First off, we have the early Minoan period. This is from around 2800 to 2000 BC. And early Minoan art is roughly equivalent to Cycladic art. Now, we're not going to look at any true early Minoan art, but based on the region, it seems likely that early Minoan art would be rather like the Cycladic art that we've just examined. The second period is Middle Minoan. This dates from around 2000 to 1600 BC. The most important aspect of the Middle Minoan period was the introduction of the potter's wheel. Now, what was made possible with the potter's wheel? It allowed for thinner walled vessels. It gave the artist the ability to create more involved shapes of greater subtlety. And thirdly, and maybe most importantly, it gave birth to industry. They were able to create a lot of these pots in a relatively short period of time. This is a beaked jug in the Kamari style from Phaistos. This dates from 1800 BC. And the height of this is just a hair over 10.5 inches tall. Now, pots such as this one were found in Middle Kingdom Egypt, and this spells out the existence of trade between these two cultures. Now, based on images like this, we can observe that the Minoans were truly born painters. The sense of design on this pot is tremendous. Minoan pottery evolved from simple linear patterns of dark lines on white pots to far more involved and successful color solutions on dark grounds like this Kamari's jug. Now, how does the Minoan language of forms differ from that of the Egyptians? I'll give you a hint. Think of King Tut's death mask. Tut's death mask featured repetition of straight parallel lines, while the Minoan pot consists of curvilinear, organic derived forms. The Minoan people seem much more involved with celebrating life in the here and now, as witnessed by rather abrupt evolutionary changes in their art. This is dramatically contrasted with the fact that Egyptian art basically didn't change over thousands of years. Now, in the late Minoan period, architecture began this period somewhere around 1600 BC. The first palaces of Crete were destroyed somewhere around 1800 BC, probably as a result of earthquakes. However, this is unclear. Late Minoan art coincides with the rebuilding of these palaces. Minoan palaces were not fortified, indicating both the power of the king of Crete and also the fact that Crete possessed a powerful navy. This slide shows us the palace at Knossos, dating from around 1700 to 1400 BC. And let's take a look now at the plan of the Palace of Knossos. Could you get lost in this place? It's thought that a palace such as this gave rise to the Greek myth of the labyrinth. A lot of the beginnings of Greek mythology are found in this period. The story of Icarus is thought to have its roots in Minoan ideas. The story of Icarus, the original reason man should not fly. This is a stairwell in the residential quarter of the palace at Knossos. And this slide perhaps represents a good argument against restoration. The columns that are pictured here were originally made with wood, and the restoration has been done with stone. The columns themselves, as seen here, are thought to be much too bulky. Nevertheless, these columns give us an idea as to the characteristics of Minoan architectural columns: bulbous, cushion-like capitals sitting on top of columns that tapered toward the bases. Now, the next slide will give us an idea of what Minoan columns might have looked like. Wow, can you imagine walking into this place and not being absolutely overwhelmed? You know, there's some evidence that the painting was done like this throughout the palace, and we'll look at that in just a moment. But look at the design on the columns, and look at how the columns are a little more slender in nature compared to the restoration we just looked at. We're going to examine Minoan painting now. This is the Queen's Megaron from the Palace of Minos, from Knossos in Crete, dating from 1700 to 1300 BC. And perhaps the most exciting aspect of Minoan art is the painting. Minoan fresco paintings exhibit a great vitality. And this is all the more remarkable considering the fact that they use the true fresco method. As you learned earlier, the Egyptians practiced the fresco secco technique, and that's where they would work on the flat wall after the wall was dry. By contrast, the Minoans used the true fresco technique. This involved preparing the wall and painting on the wall while the plaster was still wet. So the painting is not so much on the wall as it is in the wall. This technique forced artists to work on a section at a time. Obviously, you couldn't cover this entire wall in a day. This is the technique that Michelangelo used about 3,000 years later to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling. It's a tremendously demanding technique, but it's one that allows for spectacular results in the hands of a master. This is the Toreador fresco from the palace at Knossos, dating from around 1450 to 1400 BC. It's approximately 24.5 inches tall, including the border. And look closely at this fresco and others in your textbook, and you'll see that beautiful, rich colors abound. The contrasts of reds and blues bring the terrific depictions of organic forms in these paintings to life. This is a Minoan woman or a goddess called La Parisienne, and this is from the Palace of Knossos. Dates from around 1450 to 1400 BC, and this is a fragment of a fresco, approximately 10 inches tall here. Now this Minoan woman is called La Parisienne because she's a lively young woman represented full of life. Now this appreciation for life and the living is unique to what we've seen thus far in class. The Minoans seem a very different people from the Egyptians, who were constantly preoccupied with preparing for death. Another thing that separates the Minoans from some of the other people that we've looked at, particularly the ancient Near East, is the fact that we don't see images of war with the Minoans. We're going to look now at Minoan pottery and sculpture. This is the octopus jar from Crete, dating from around 1500 BC. It stands 11 inches tall. The octopus jar here is certainly a far cry from the first Minoan pottery that we saw. Again, it's a beautiful design, yet the form here is treated in an almost comic-like fashion. Now, speaking of fashion, what do we say about style? Things come and go in and out of style, and this idea can be seen in later Minoan pottery, which reverted once again back to abstraction. The development of Minoan pottery follows an abstract to representational to abstract sort of pattern. This is the harvester vase from Hagia Triada, dating from around 1550 to 1500 BC. Its width is only 4.5 inches. Now, the Minoan artist was less constrained than the Egyptian artist in terms of how he or she handled the human figure, particularly in groups. Figures overlap and integrate with the pattern of pitchforks here, and this echoes the Cycladic concern for the use of negative space. Now, very little true sculpture in the round was done by the Minoans. In fact, large-scale sculpture pretty much doesn't exist in the Minoan culture. Now, what did large-scale sculpture seek to accomplish with the Egyptians? It sought to glorify their gods and their pharaohs. This does not seem to have been a concern with the Minoans. Perhaps there was a lack of a formal religion followed by the general population. This is a leaping youth from the Palace of Minos, 1550 BC, ivory, about a foot long. Now, this small sculpture in ivory differs from Minoan work that we've seen thus far in that it's less graceful, it's not as lively, and it's almost overly concerned with a careful rendering, as opposed to the notion of letting the paint flow, as one might find in the organic fresco paintings that we looked at. So sculpture, with respect to the Minoans, was not their strongest suit. This is the snake goddess from around 1650 BC. It's made of faience, height almost a foot tall. Now, even this snake goddess, while charming and curious, seems remarkably static when compared to La Parisienne or even the lyre player from the Cycladic culture. Now, faience sculptures such as this and Egyptian examples of this are pottery of brilliant colors in which the color is often worked initially into the form. Now, most approaches to ceramics involve you creating the form and then firing the form, and then glazing the form, covering it with color, and then firing it once again. The faience is sort of a one-step process. We're going to close now looking at Mycenaean art. Now, the power of the Aegean area shifted to Mycenae after the destruction of the great palaces on Crete. By 1500 BC, the Mycenaeans had established the culture that would be immortalized by Homer in his Iliad and Odyssey. This is a corbelled gallery in the walls of the citadel at Tiryns, and this interior from Tiryns, dating from around 14 to 1200 BC, immediately tells us something about these people. It's that they were concerned with fortification. This corbelled gallery is constructed with megalithic construction techniques, large stones. So we get the idea now that the Mycenaeans were a warrior people. Now, who did the Greeks believe were responsible for these massive walls? The Cyclopes, a race of giants, hence the term Cyclopean. Now, a corbelled construction, or a corbelled gallery like we see here, is where, as you go up, the rocks just project out a little bit farther and a little bit farther until they meet in the middle. This is the Lioness Gate from Mycenae in Greece, around 1250 BC. Now, at last in the Lioness Gate we have something that's not been seen before in Aegean art, and that is monumental architectural sculpture. What type of construction is used here? It's the post and lintel. And then we also see a corbelled arch. Now, what purpose did the corbelled arch serve here? It relieves the stress and strain of all that dead weight on the post and lintel construction. Now, the lions do a magnificent job of bringing these two construction types together and unify the work. Now, it's thought that the faces or heads of these lions was done using a beaten gold technique. So the mask that we'll look at a little later on may have represented the heads of the lions in this case. The column itself between the lions gives us a clue as to what the columns in Minoan palaces should look like. And the column itself is thought to represent the female form, much like the earliest work from this chapter. Now, it's believed that the Mycenaeans had a relationship with the megalithic culture of Europe that produced Stonehenge, for example. Now, reasons for this are that they both used the spiral motif, they both used monumental stones for building, and perhaps most importantly, they both used the tholos, or the beehive tomb. And this is the treasury of Atreus from Mycenae in Greece, dating from around 1300 to 1250 BC. And both cultures also used the long entry passage, the dromos, that led into the circular tomb chamber with its conical roof that is called the tholos. This is the vault of the tholos of the treasury of Atreus. Basically, we're just looking up here. This is the largest unified space without interior support in all of the ancient world. And what type of vault is it? Again, it's a corbelled vault. Now, plans and cutaway views of the treasury show that the vault was covered with a mound of dirt. Now, what did this dirt accomplish or counteract? The dirt countered the outward thrust of the stones. It acted as an external rather than an internal support for the structure. I know it sounds odd to think that piling dirt on top would actually help it and keep it from collapsing, but that's exactly the way it works here. This is an inlaid dagger blade with a lion hunt from grave circle A in Mycenae. and it's bronze and is inlaid with gold, silver, and niello. It's about 9 inches long. Now these dagger blades show a Minoan influence, although they're not as graceful, and show us how the Mycenaeans saw themselves. Again, they saw themselves as warriors. This is one of the Vaphio cups from around 1500 BC. It's gold. The cups are only about 3 or 3.5 inches tall. Now, not for a second would we question the validity, importance, and originality of these images. In a sense, all art is born of the past. And this is an analogy that you can make to the importance of the study of art in this class if you want to make new original art in the future. It's been said, and I said earlier, that the only way to make truly original art is to be so familiar with that of the past that it becomes second nature. Ignorance doesn't work. Why reinvent the wheel? There are great relief techniques used here in these cups made of beaten gold, and they're varying between low relief and almost coming to high relief, but these are some of the greatest works of art produced by the Mycenaean culture. This is a mask made of beaten gold from around 1600 to 1500 BC. Okay, and this gold mask here, one of several found along with the Vaphio cups that we'll look at, forms an interesting parallel to comments made about the artwork of ancient Iran. What criticisms were leveled at their work? That it was not original, that it was eclectic. Well, these works, in particular the masks, and there are masks not only of animals but of humans as well, these masks indicate a number of things. First, that there was an influx of gold from Egypt, and the masks that you would find of people served in funeral ceremonies, again perhaps an Egyptian influence. And the style of these masks strongly relate to Minoan art.